Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to see this program tonight. My name is Jessica Chamberlain. I'm the director of the Norfolk Public Library, and we appreciate so much you being here to support this author, an important historical person that is here this evening, and just to be here to learn and share that love of learning at the library. I'm going to turn the program and the introductions over to Will Cox, who works very closely with Mr. Kleinberg, and he will give the introduction. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I am pleased to introduce to you Milton M. Kleinberg, the owner and CEO of Senior Market Sales Incorporated, or SMS. SMS is a successful national and now international insurance marketing company that employs nearly 200 people in just the Omaha area and more than 12,000 insurance agents nationally. Milton, or Milt, is also a prominent philanthropist in Omaha, donating to several causes such as the Salvation Army, the Institute for Holocaust Education, and many other Omaha charities. Now, before coming here, many of you have probably heard about Milton or done some research on your own. But for those of you who haven't, you should know that Milton is a man with an amazing story to tell. And with extremist Islamic groups such as ISIS committing genocide on Christians and other minorities in the Middle East, this is a story that must be heard today.
We need to turn our cell phones off.
Somebody has a cell phone.
Everybody. Sorry.
That's all right, thank you. Now, Milton was born in one of the worst times in history. Yet despite this, he was able to survive due to great sacrifices by his mother. And after arriving in the United States at the age of 14, without knowing a word of English, he managed to finish high school, attend college, serve in Korea, host his own radio show, and even organize his community in Milwaukee against a group of neo-Nazis, before finally settling in Omaha and becoming a successful businessman. Now, originally, Milton did not share his story for many decades. In fact, he only began to write it down after some of his grandchildren, who had visited concentration camps in Poland and museums, began to ask questions. At first, this story was only meant to be a legacy for his children and grandchildren and other descendants. However, upon his family's insistence, Milt decided to self-publish his first version of the book, called Memories of My Childhood, During and After the Holocaust, 1937 to 1951, but in November of 2010. However, at first, Milt didn't think the book would be of interest to anyone except family and friends. Then, in August of 2014, the director of the Institute for Holocaust Education asked if he would reprint the book so it could be used as a high school manual for Holocaust studies. The new version of the book was released under the name Bread or Death. Again, it is now my great honor to introduce to you Milton Kleinberg.
Okay. I'll get it. Thank you all for coming. And of course I jumped the gun and started the program going a little bit earlier. I had some people who came here early and gave me a big good afternoon, so it got me motivated and I kept going. Well, some of you who heard my beginning, you'll have to listen to it again. By the way, this is an absolutely beautiful library and a very pleasant place. I've never been to Norfolk, but I'll make sure that I'm back. I'll tell you that, that's for sure. My name is Milton Kleinberg. However, I was born Mendel Dawidowicz in Fabianic, Poland on January 28, 1937, a long time ago. It was absolutely the worst time and the worst of all places in all Jewish history to be born to Jewish parents. Hitler was ranting about the Jews in Germany and was getting ready to invade Europe. The And he was making allies with the Soviet Union, Russia at that time, Stalin. So the world is going to be turned upside down in a short space of time. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west, and 17 days later, the Russian allies invaded from the east, dividing the country between them, and using the River Bug as the demarcation line. This is, by the way, the fourth time that those two have divided Poland in the last 200 years. But this time I happened to be there. 17, the war lasted 2,076 days. And in that short time, of the 3,300,000 Jews that were alive then, 90% perished. The 8 days after the Germans started the war, the German troops were marching in lockstep down the cobblestone streets of Pawiniec, Poland. They immediately began repression against the Jews. The Jewish synagogue was destroyed on Rosh Hashanah, which most of you know as the Jewish New Year, and turned it into a barn. Then Germany annexed Western Poland. They called it Wonderland. And one of the edicts that in that annexation said that no Jews will be permitted to live in any part of Poland. Of course, now we were in Germany. So, any part of Germany. And now we were Germany. So that meant to all of us forced deportation. On a cold December morning, German troops surrounded our street called Ulica Kościelna and forcibly evicted us. Forcibly. We had less than an hour to grab what we could possibly carry, and then they lined us up 4 abreast and marched us down. You can see one of them. Marched us down through the center of town to the train station. At the train station waiting was a locomotive attached to about 15 to 20 cattle cars. The stench from the cattle cars was just overpowering. Then they herded us into those smelly cattle cars so tight that we could barely have enough room to turn around. 36 hours later, the train stopped in a Polish town called Siedlice, and we were ordered out. The cold air hit us like a slap in the face. But oddly enough, it was almost invigorating just to get out of those smelly cattle cars. Then they marched us down to a burned out synagogue, which you can see, to the center of town. The building was still smoldering a little bit, and the smell of burning flesh was in the air. Then they asked us to go into the synagogue. Of course, we were reluctant to go in, fearful that once inside, they will torch the synagogue with us inside. However, German soldiers said there's water and bread inside, and it won't be there very long. So we overcame our fears and went inside. Inside, we found some room next to some other relatives that were deported with us. I was almost 4 then, and my brother Herschel was a year younger. As we just got settled in, we watched and saw an elderly man with a white beard reading having his prayer show on and reading a prayer book and running around and talking to what we considered an invisible man. The people in the synagogue ignored him, thinking that he lost his mind because his wife and son died in the fire. But being curious, Herschel and I went up to the man and asked him who was he talking to. He looked at me with those sad eyes and said, an angel of death. But he says, nobody but me can see him. He also said that as long as I recite the Shema, which is a Jewish prayer, the angel of death won't take him. For 2 days we watched this tortured man running around the burned out altar and arguing with the angel of death. On the third day, he came over, handed my mother some of his belongings. My father, he gave some money, and he said, I won't need it anymore. The angel of death showed me what the future has in store for me, and I want no part of it. And he repeated it several times, I want no part of it. Then he put his hand on my left shoulder, and with an earnest voice, he said to my parents, you must leave this place and go across the river Bug to the Russian side. There's some hope and life yet, but here there's nothing but death. Then he quietly went over to the burned out altar. He took off his jacket, folded it up, put it on the torch floor. Then he took off his prayer shawl, folded it and put it on top of his jacket. Then he carefully laid down his prayer book right on top of his shawl. And slowly he lay down on that floor, resting his head on his prayer book. Then he said his prayer for the last time, and he died. I don't remember him telling us his name, but in my dreams, he always shows up and calls himself Abraham. He has such a reassuring voice, and many times I saw him in my dreams. My parents took Abraham's word to heart. The next day they found a Polish border guard who had an old, flat-bottomed, dilapidated boat whom they bribed to take us across to the Russian side. I really don't have the time to get into the trip across, but on the other side was Russian soldiers, and after a day or so we were arrested by the NKVD, which later became the KGB. And they sent us, a few days later, they sent us down to a city called Białystok, which held a Polish prison or holding camp. It was Polish prisoners of all kinds, including Jews, were in that prison. We were all earmarked for deportation to slave labor camps deep into the Soviet Union. And I think it was in February of 1940, we were loaded onto Russian trains. They weren't cattle cars, but they were box cars, a little bit bigger, a little bit more comfortable. And from there, we went with the train about 900 miles north to the most eastern part of European Russia. It's by the Finnish border, to a town called Arkhangelsk. Arkhangelsk was a timber town consisting of small wooden houses and wooden sidewalks. We stayed together as a family on a Holocaust, which is a collective farm, for over a year. It was where my brother, youngest brother, Belvo, was born. It was cold. I mean, it's an incredible place. And a couple hundred miles down the road was Finland. So if you wanted to escape, that's where you could go. There was absolutely no place to go. So they didn't even bother to guard us. They didn't care what we did. But everybody had to have a job, and if you didn't have a job, you didn't eat. So it was a simple solution. Just as we were getting used to this incredible place, the Germans decided to attack their friends, the Russians, across a 1,000-mile border. That was in summer of 1941, and the war finally caught up with us. The Russians told us that we need to get ready for relocation. And there's an interesting story why they relocated everybody. And we were going to be relocated, we didn't know at the time, but we were going to be relocated to Central Asia. The journey from Arkhangelsk to Central Asia is about 4,700 miles. All the way across Russia, which was horrific. Generally, the trip under normal conditions would take about 2 to 3 weeks. But these weren't normal conditions. We were traveling in the heat of battle. And that extended the journey to 3 horrific months. This time, there was 5 of us traveling together. Mother was nursing Belvo. I was responsible for my brother Herschel. He was not only a year younger than me, but I felt like I was 10 years older. And Father had the responsibility of trying to get food to supplement ration cards. When we left Arkhangelsk, we were issued passports marked Pole on them and red ration cards. The ration cards entitled a person to 550 grams of bread, which is about a pound, and a little bit less for children. It was not enough to keep body and soul together. But without that bread, death was a certainty. And this is why we call it bread or death. The train that we traveled on, there were about 35 men, women, and children. Sometimes whole families were in that train as well. We had a lot of experiences along the road, but a couple things that really stand out. In a town, someplace between Omsk and Novosibirsk, my father got off the train, bartering for food. And the way both my mother and my father were good at barterers. They went off the train, they gave away things that they really didn't need, but they will manage to get food. Because in Russia, anything, from an ashtray to a lighter, was currency, very good currency. And he never came back. He just went off to barter and never came back. But worst of all, he had with him our passports, our money, and those life-saving ration cards. And without them, we were completely dependent on our neighbors on the train. The problem was they barely had enough food for themselves. They helped as much as they could, but it was very, very tight. My mother even tried, at one time, tried to be a beggar. She put a blanket over my brother Herschel, and we stood by her skirts, and she wanted to look pitiful, but everybody looked pitiful. And besides, she wasn't very good at it, so she gave it up. A Polish woman on our train who also had very bad luck after she left Poland. Her husband died in Arhangelsk. Her son, her elder son, died under the train in an accident. He was a friend of mine. And during that particular period, my mother was sympathetic to her and helped to take care of her baby. Now her baby died from typhus or malnutrition or both. And she came over and said, I just want to thank you for your kindness during those horrific or terrible nights when my son died. And she took out her passport and 3 ration cards and handed it to my mother. She says, I won't need it anymore. She said, now you are me. The Russians won't be able to tell us apart, but you can use the ration cards for the bread and the passport you'll need to get the ration cards. She most likely saved her life. Clutching her baby, she opened the sliding door on the train, a moving train. One train was coming from the opposite, we were going around the bend. One train was coming from the opposite direction, and we were going in the other direction. Before anybody could react, she said, screamed out, I have nothing to live for anymore. I gave all I could to this cursed leg. And before anybody could react, she jumped. That incident, we saw a lot of that along the way, but that incident unhinged everybody. Those ration cards were lifesavers. But it was already too late for my younger brother, Basil. On the last day of the train, he died from typhoid and malnutrition at that time. In fall of 1941, the train stopped and a tall, blonde Russian soldier opened up the door and yelled up, welcome to Samarkand, the jewel of the Orient. And he says, take everything you can, carry with you, because you're not coming back. And then you heard a big cheer, a big hoorah. We were transported to Samarkand to replenish the labor pool there. Most of the men were drafted for the army, so most women were left to do the work. Samarkand had 2 commodities that were very important, tobacco and cotton. On the first job, my mother was assigned to a cotton gin. They were sitting on these little benches, picking out seeds from raw cotton. Those of you who farmers, who ever grew cotton, you know how difficult that is. The problem is the cotton gin has never arrived in Russia at that time. So it was very, very hard work. In 1943, my brother Herschel came down with malaria, and in spite of my mother's bartering skills, she couldn't get the medicines, and he died. My mother's friend happened to get a job in the tobacco factory, and she encouraged Mother to join her to work in the tobacco factory. They developed a scheme where they could steal small quantities of tobacco and to barter with. She shared that tobacco, of course, with the guards and the manager. tobacco was a currency that was worth more than money. Because in Russia, if you had money, you were a capitalist. But tobacco was a beautiful currency. You could barter with it, you could bribe with it, and she was good at it. After my brother died, mother, and Aya was her name, the woman, managed to get me into a children's home, a Polish children's home, which was separate from the Russian children's home. And that was located outside town on the old, dangerous Black Road. The Black Road was dangerous from the times of Genghis Khan. It was the old Silk Road that traveled across Russia, Samarkand to Iran. In that children's home, I became of age. I made friends with two like-minded boys, Pyotr and Edmund, and together we set up a club in back of the outhouse, and we called it Argentina. Now, there's an interesting story about Argentina, but you just have to get a book to find out. From the back of the outhouse of our club, we schemed how to raid the orchard across the street from the children's home and vegetable garden a mile down the road on the Black Road. Like I said, there was a lot of incidents that occurred there, but two which were somewhat interesting. One evening we were hiding in the bushes next to the vegetable garden, waiting for the labor to leave. The two last labor workers was a Russian and an Uzbek. Somehow they had words, a fight ensued. The Uzbek pulled his curved knife and cut the Russian. The Russian grabbed a switchblade out of his pocket and stabbed the Uzbek several times until he fell to the ground. The Russian looked around and started running and threw away the knife. The knife landed not too far from where we were hiding. So my friends wanted to take off and run. And I said, no, I'm going to find that knife. I found the knife, cleaned it off, and kept it. And that knife was a lifesaver on several occasions during that year. In 1943, on one of those occasions, the knife came extremely handy. I was back riding on a donkey, drunk as could be, swearing in both Russian and Uzbek, and we understood it. And barely holding on. Just before they came, a wagon with apples spilled some in a ditch. So the three of us jumped into the ditch and stuffed the apples in our shirts. When we got back on the Black Road, that Uzbek saw us with the apples. He came over, grabbed my shirt, tore it, opened it, and the apples fell on the ground. And then in his native tongue, he said, I'm going to teach you kids a lesson of being korrupchuk, which means thief. He took out his curved knife. All the Uzbeks had curved knives. And he swung at my throat. He missed my throat, but I jumped back with my arms outstretched, but he managed to get me in my left armpit. Then, my friend Pyotr, who always walked with a walking stick, grabbed the heavy end of his walking stick, hit to his back, beside the head. To his back, settled up, got shaken on the knees, and dropped the knife. As he was reaching for his knife, the adrenaline kicked in me, and I grabbed my switchblade from my pocket, which I always carried, and stabbed him in the throat. And as he was reaching for a knife again, I stabbed him twice more in the stomach. But somehow, Mrs. Beck managed to pick up the knife, get on top of the donkey, and the donkey carried him down the Black Road to the orchard, where he fell off or slid off and died. The look, and the look of shock in his Beck's face, and the blood streaming from his throat, is something that none of us have forgotten. And we always talked about it. There were several other occasions. On one occasion, our friend Edmund was kidnapped, and Piotr and I managed to rescue him. And one time, I was stealing some peaches and got shot in my right foot, and other occasions, but that's what the book is for. On the war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. The children home with all the teachers and staff were transported back to Poland, to a city called Breslau. In that Breslau kindergarten, Piotr was reunited with his father, wounded father, Edmund with his mother, who was just let go from a concentration camp. And I, of all things, saw my father smiling, standing there. So I was reunited with my father. There was only one hitch. By then he already had a wife and 2 children. And my mother was going to come to Poland 2 weeks later, to a very big surprise, as you can imagine. At any rate, the city of Pabianice, where we were born, lived for 1,000 years, was pure, incredible. There wasn't a word of Yiddish spoken any place. The peddlers, the smell, the sound was all gone. The Jewish signs in the window, it was all gone. It was as though we would never existed. It was wet, swept clean. And to add insult to injury, our Polish neighbors let us know that Jews will no longer be welcome in this new Poland. So as Jews have done hundreds of times before, we packed what was left of our shattered lives and moved on. In Breslau, my mother was sitting on a bench in front of the synagogue. Breslau is one of those towns that before the war was Germany, and it was given to Poland in exchange for territory that they took. After the war, the Russians never gave back any territory. So we were sitting in front, and all the synagogues were destroyed except one, that one synagogue. And that synagogue is where Jews gathered around. It had a big bench, and it had a big bulletin board, and people would stop by and drop notes. So everybody who came to town had to stop by that synagogue. My mother was sitting on a bench in the synagogue, despondent, didn't know what to do. She got her papers from the rabbi because she wanted to get a divorce, and a get in Judaism, but a divorce. That was her first order of business. She didn't know what to do. The other problem she had, she couldn't read or write in any language, including Yiddish. Next to her sat down Milton Kleinberg, who was there looking for his wife and 2 children he left behind. And they started talking and exchanging horrors of our lives in the Soviet Union. And they hit it off, and they decided to make plans for the future. Just have to live the past, as my father used to say, Father Aaron Kleinberg said, gotta leave the past behind us. And somehow we managed to escape Poland for the second time. And we ended up in a displaced persons camp, a DP camp, in the American zone of West Germany. So we were back in Germany. This time the people were actually smiling. But anyways, and we were in several displaced person camps. In a DP camp called Wasser-Alfingen, mother married father, and my two sisters, Bessie and Goldie, were born there. And on, I think it was, it was May 1951, the DP camps were being liquidated, so we had to find a place to go. We came down to Brennhaven, and we got passage on General M. Bletchford, and we landed in New York on May 14, 1951. From New York, we caught a train to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a happy life. Do I have more time, or? I guess I will, or not. That's not much cost me. Milwaukee, Wisconsin was a happy place for me. In Milwaukee, I mean, I considered it my hometown. Now it's Omaha, Nebraska, and I've been there for 30-some years, so that makes me almost a native. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I went to high school. It was a difficult thing to go to high school because I couldn't read or write. So, but it was helpful that I was good in sports, so they had a lot of help. The teachers and kids. The first year they were very generous to me because I didn't cause any trouble. One interesting point about that, they had us, we landed in May of 51, and by September I had to be ready for high school. I had two other friends that they hired a teacher, was a Polish woman, a Polish principal, a retired Polish principal. I was to travel to her to have her get us acclimated and get ready for school. And she says, I catch on very fast. She says, I generally don't tell kids to lie, but I'll make an exception in your case. What she told me to do is tell them that I finished grade school, because if I don't, they'll put me in the second grade or third grade, and I won't last there very long. But if I say I graduated grade school and they put me in high school, at least I'll have it on my paper that I went to high school. She says, you'll never make it probably, but whatever you can get out of it, you can. But anyways, the first year, I must admit, they passed me out of sheer kindness. The second year, I was a DC student. But the third year, I put up with everybody. I had B's and I graduated from high school, which was just wonderful. After high school, I joined the Army, spent a tour in Korea, and came back home where I found my lovely wife, Marcia, and we got married. We got married, and eventually I got into the insurance business. And in 84, I think, 1984, I came down here just to help out, to work in an insurance agency in Omaha. And later on, I purchased that insurance insurance agency, and we have grown to a very large operation. And there's a lot more to that side of the story too, but I love America. And one thing I want to tell you, that I am definitely unapologetic American patriot.